Okay, now we're to the fall. So we've covered a lot of stuff. Today I've covered protology / creation. Protology is the study of first things. Eschatology is the study of last things. We studied anthropology. We did men and women. I'm certain that will get me in trouble. And now we're going to be working on, the fall, right? So now we're working on fall, right? And the fall is this idea that humanity once had this very high state within God's order, and they fell right away from it. If you take the metaphor of a fall and you just kind of look at it, they fell off the ladder or something. And that's historically how Christians have kind of talked about Genesis 3 and books that comment on it. It's talking about a fall. So I want to unpack that, and I want to do that by talking about two things, static versus dynamic realities, and tailing on that relationship. And I want to also talk about death versus life systems, which I've already kind of talked about a bit. So a static versus a dynamic system. Static systems are how fallen humans operate. And in a static system, you own the system, okay? So people like to own their own stuff, right? So property is a static system. I own it. And by the way, this is not a commentary on how secular society should operate necessarily. People own their own stuff. That's a static system, right? It's mine, I own it, right? But you can also look at this in, for instance, how a lot of machines work, right? So a lot of machines are designed to be, to an extent, static, right? So you look at how men design, like, the washing machine, right? You push a button, it runs. It's kind of its own thing. Although you do have to plug it into the wall, though. But a lot of our ideas as humans reside in this concept of substance, which is what I really want to talk about with this substance, right? That there's something we own in reality that makes it what it is, no matter what. And that it's always real, okay? And that is how fallen humans view this earth, that we own it, it's ours, it's real, we have it, right? And we can't have it, okay? Now, in a more dynamic relational system, and not that static won't be in there, but in a dynamic relational system, things are not owned necessarily. Things are, how would I put it, ruled, guided, moved, right? And if you see this in the Bible, that's more how Yahweh looks at reality. That it's kind of like... it's connected to a life source, right? So it's not like it's separate from his life, right? He gives it life and connects it to his own life. And out of that flows all of this, right? Without him, it just devolves back to chaos. And so what you see in Genesis 3 is an opportunity for humanity to choose between a life system or a death system. And a death system is a static system, and a life system is static and dynamic. It's both at the same time. All right, and so the death system is revolving back to nothing, and the life system is being something, okay? So if you look at Genesis 3, he sets two different trees there, right? And he has a tree of life and he has a tree of the knowledge of good and evil, okay, which is very interesting. The tree of life, what's interesting about it is you can eat from it forever, and it always gives you life, which is an interesting thing about life. If you're in life, it's always there, but it's always a gift, and you can always receive it again, okay? But the interesting thing about the death system, right, which is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, is you eat it from the one time you're dead, right? It kills you, and you just stay that way, right? It's not a gift. It's like being executed almost. Bam, you're done. And the reason that tree did that to them is, I think it's more, you could just call it the tree of death, although he calls it the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the reason it's called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is in divine ethics, right? So if you get into the category of like meta-ethics, what guides the ethics of all things, right? The meta-ethics of God is because I said so. Right? How many times have you said that to your kids? Because I said so. And he made the rule real simple: don't eat that crappy fruit. And when they chose to disobey that, they played God. They made their own ethical system. And if you notice, that's what Lucifer tells them to do. You will be like God. He invites them into a world where they claim divinity on their own terms. To be God himself on their own terms. And the Bible will carry this theme out all throughout. And the problem with doing that is it severs your relationship with God. That's what eating from that tree did. It's actually almost like in the attitude itself. But the tree had like a metaphysical thing about it too that made it that way, which is sort of interesting. It's all kind of mysterious. But when they ate from that tree, it severed the covenant with God, right? And so at that point, they get unplugged, right? And I've talked about humans kind of like as automatons or robots. He unplugged them because they cut off the connection. And immediately when they ate from that fruit tree, all of a sudden they move into a death system. They're afraid. They hide, right? They start murdering each other. And they don't repent of it, right? Because they're claiming to be God. How could I do something wrong if I'm God, right? That's why people don't repent. They want to play God. And so what you see here is they've moved from life to death. It's collapsed. Now it's chaos. And they're moving back to this Tehom stuff. It's back to Tohu Vabohu. They're entering into a rebellion state. They're dying. And they're already dead, right? As soon as they rebelled, they got cut off from God and they're dead because he's the life source. And that's what Maweth is. That's the Hebrew word for death or moors or whatever language you use. It's being cut off from God, right? So the moment they ate that fruit tree, they're dead. And yeah, they kept operating, but they're operating at a death state. And death states are quite different from life states. So he put them in a death state, and once they're in that death state, they like you can't even get out of it, right? They're just stuck in it. Technically, they should repent, but they don't, right? And people don't start repenting in the antediluvian world until the line of Seth, right? That's what Genesis says, and then they started to call on the name of the Lord. But most people never did, right? There were billions and billions of people in the world when the flood happened. Most of them just didn't even care about that. Let's see. So they enter a death state, and it would have been very easy to get out of it and just repent, but they choose not to. And that's why God kicks them out of the garden, because now they're hardening their hearts. They're staying in it, and they're in a rebellious state. And that's why he cuts them off from the tree of life, because if they ate from that tree, they wouldn't actually be alive. What it would have done is just made them like endure forever in that state, which is actually not that great for them. So he cuts them off from that, kicks them out of the garden, puts a cherub there with a big sword, right? Kind of like this martial artist at the entrance of the garden. And if you think people didn't try to break in, you're kidding yourself. And kicks them out. And they go east, right? So my theory is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was on the west side, the tree of life was on the east side. They're at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and they repent. That's where Yahweh finds them. He marches them out past the tree of life to make them think about it before they get evicted, right? He gives them one more chance to repent. And they don't take it, and out they go, right into death. And they don't repent of it. And what that did to all reality is it brought reality into a death state, right? Because they claimed Lucifer as their God. They revolted against Yahweh. They entered a death state. Yahweh cursed the creation as a result of it, and everything just falls into chaos. And the whole universe, not the whole universe, but, like the whole, in a way, the cosmos themselves entered a death state after that. Although I think angel realms are a little bit different in some regards. But, they're up there too, right? That's what space is. It's like angel territory. So they kind of had their own thing going on. But I think also a lot of their stuff got messed up by it too. You can see that in Revelation, for instance. Let's see. I think that about covers it. So now they're in a death state. They're in rebellion. They're going to need help getting out. And the rest of the Bible is the story of God getting them out of that death state and back into life, right? Which won't culminate till the judgment day when Yahweh returns and judges the living and the dead, right, in his glory. So when he settles the accounts, then people who have repented move into a permanent, all-abiding life state. People who haven't, they go into a permanent death state. And that's really what it is. So if you want a life state, he has just repent, right? Plug yourself back in. Although he's got to do it for you, but you have to call upon his name. Okay, well that's kind of how I look at the fall. And it is a pretty holistic engagement. Obviously, there's so much junk messed up down here because of it. And that's an important thing to remember. It wasn't just a tiny thing, that decision, because they decided to be God, right? And the universe is an open system. It is relational. And when they cut themselves off from the life giver, that just knocked them dead, right? From then on, they did not operate properly. And Lucifer did become their god by default, right? So he does run this thing down here. And has since the fall, right? Now, this is all Lucifer's junk. The thing is, he's not that great at his job, so I think Yahweh has to like actually help him do it. But he's the one who promised them, you can do this, right? So he led them into it. The problem is, it's really hard to run a world where everybody thinks they're God, right? I mean, what a mess. Yeah, that's proven to be a real freaking mess, hasn't it? That's why, governments never work out the way they're supposed to. Okay, I guess that about settles that. So that's the fall of humanity. So keep tuning in. Let's see what's next. Salvation. Okay, so next we're going to do salvation. Of course, that's a vast topic in and of itself, so thanks for tuning in. We'll keep going here. All right, bye. God bless.